to understand that there is this messianic expectation in what we're doing. We are waiting for the Lord's second coming. So we want to look at how this mission has been accomplished, sort of. All right? The work of the wall is done, but there's more to do. And so the first thing I want you to see there is in verses 15 and 16. When God is at work, it gets noticed. My favorite museum in the Washington, D.C. area is actually not in Washington, D.C. It's outside in the city of Reston. And it is part of the Air and Space Museum. But it is this giant airplane hangar. It's called the Udvar Hazy Air and Space Museum. If you've never gone there, totally recommend it. It is my favorite by far. And I remember seeing the progression of the airplanes, especially from World War I to World War II. And then as I'm just looking at the advancements in just that short period of time, this one thought just kind of overwhelms me. With the walls around it being built, understand where we've gone, where Nehemiah first heard what was going on in Jerusalem, and he started praying. That was just 10 months ago. From the time that Nehemiah first spoke to the king was only 6 months before the wall was built. But I don't want you to see the speed of how it happened. I want you to see what happens next. In verse 16, when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. All the enemies heard it, where it says they were affected in their esteem. What it means is they were humbled by it. They thought they were up here, better than the people, and then God does this work, and now they've been humbled, humiliated by how quickly God's people built the wall. And then we see God was glorified in it. When we look back in chapter 4, we looked at how all the enemies were surrounding Jerusalem. We had people from the north and from the east and from the south and from the west. And though this may have been frightening, I want you to think now about what God was doing here. God sovereignly permitted the enemies to grow and to surround them, working on the walls of Jerusalem, so that when he triumphed, he would not just get the glory and praise from his people, but other people, his enemies, would notice. He wanted the other nations to know that God was with his people. And so think about this. For 70 years, Babylon came in and just destroyed Jerusalem. And God used his prophets to say, this is going to happen because I permitted it. But to the nations all around, it would look like, well, that God has left his people. That God's not as strong as he was. His reputation, he's weak. Atone for sin, cancel the debt, and then by dying, permits obstacles and allows the enemy to draw near so that when he works, that evil, the forces of evil are surrounding you. I want to encourage you with something. That's not the time for us to feel defeated. It may seem like it. Like that's the time where we should feel overwhelmed and anxious. See, what I'm saying here is when you sense the surrounding influence of the enemy, to realize God is not falling behind. He's not just allowing this because he can't stop it. He's about to do something. I don't know what that is. His plans are way different than ours. His ways are so much higher than ours. But when you feel like the enemy is pressuring you, that's not the time to get into despair. That's the time to lean in to God's power and believe he's about to do something. Because he wouldn't just let the enemy make me feel the oppression and the affliction and the mockery and the pressure if he wasn't about to do something. It's important to pause. Nehemiah records this because he's saying here, we just pause and we reflect on the work of what God has done. So record victories and triumphs, praises and encouragements, and especially when they've come from dark places where only God could have accomplished those works. Noticed. And we find out later in Nehemiah that Sanballat is still around as well, and they had this two-pronged attack. We looked at the first part of this already. They were trying to intimidate them, scare them into stopping the wall. They were making fun of the wall, saying even a fox, if it sat on the top, it would fall apart. But then they had even a more sinister approach. This happened even before Nehemiah got there. They understood their influence could affect the Jews for a long time. They formed alliances on the inside. Tobiah, who, by the way, is of Jewish descent, that his name is a Hebrew name, though he is now an Ammonite, an enemy of the people, it says, had many Jews bound to oath by him. Why? Because he married his children into houses of Jewish nobility. You kind of see how he's like playing this out. In chapter 12 and 13, we find out that he, like, you know what, that Tobiah guy, he's not really that bad of a guy, right? Like, you know, I wouldn't have let someone who's bad marry my child, you know, give him a chance. And Nehemiah's like, what are you guys talking about? Because you have these letters, but I have letters where he's trying to intimidate me to get me to stop doing the work. And all this is happening after the wall is finished. What it reminds us of is that even when the enemy is humbled, has been humiliated, they're not going to go down quietly. There has always been opposition to God's work, but God has always had a plan for that opposition. The first prophecy in the Bible is that from the offspring of Eve, this goes back to Genesis chapter 3. From the offspring of Eve will come a son who will crush the head of the snake. And when we looked at Colossians 2:15, we see Jesus already did that. He put Satan and the forces of evil to open shame. And yet a snake is a great illustration for this, because this spoke of Satan's defeat. But even when a snake is dead, it can still poison you. A snake can still bite several hours after it's dead. And if you encounter its fangs, even weeks or months after it's dead, it can still poison you. What this reminds us of is this: as long as we are doing the Lord's work until he returns, there will always be opposition. We're always going to face obstacles and challenges. People may be hostile, and the spiritual forces of evil are going to try to stop it. There will always be opposition. But if we're expecting it, then we're always ready for it, and we're prepared for it, and we're constantly turning to the Lord to strengthen our hands to do the work. Now, it does not say here that Nehemiah prayed for the Lord to strengthen his hands. But when we were looking at chapter 4, And we know that Nehemiah was a constant man of prayer. When he faced opposition, he turned to the Lord. Let our guard down. There's always going to be opposition. Until our enemy is fully and finally defeated, what happened at the cross is taken place in its full effect. There's going to be opposition. So praise the Lord for what he's done, but don't let your guard down as you continue to serve him. And then we see that Nehemiah is always working toward a bigger goal. Now, you'll be very thankful when I say I'm not going to read Nehemiah 7, 1 through 73. That's a lot of verses. It's a lot of names. It's a really long chapter. But what this chapter shows us is what happens after Nehemiah built the wall. The question becomes, what's next? And we see how Nehemiah is working toward a greater goal. How Nehemiah knew why he was there. I got to do this project, but this project's going to lead to this and to this, all with a certain goal in mind. The wall was finished, but the work was not. What was the bigger goal for Nehemiah? We see three things, even just in this passage alone. The first thing that Nehemiah realized he needed to do was to reestablish the people's identity. You see what happens in verse 1 after the wall has been built? Appointed in front of their homes at the wall. And we get the idea probably of the gatekeepers and the guards, right? Like protect the city, that makes sense. And then you're like singers and Levites who work at the temple. Like, what is singing going to do to protect the wall? Nehemiah was not just looking for the strength of men. He was looking for the Lord's strength. And singers and Levites would have been worshipers. Not just for the temple, but also here we see it's for the gates. Why is Nehemiah putting singers on the wall? It reminds us that Jerusalem was a city of worship. Every act, even guarding the wall, was meant to be an act of worship to the Lord. Because what happened to these people the last time? They stopped worshiping the Lord. The reason why they were in exile, they stopped worshiping the Lord. They started following other idols. They stopped obeying the word of God. They forgot who they were, and they forgot who they belonged to. And Nehemiah is like, we could build a wall and just be a secular city. But that's not what God has called us to be. We are his people. We're not like every other city. This is the city of the Lord. And we are his people, called to make him great. Nehemiah is like, we worship him in all that we do. And so we need to think about this as we do projects here at our church and we accomplish certain things. If all we do is maintain facilities and operate with budgets and run programs, we're not distinctive. What makes us distinctive is that we worship the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Because the bigger goal than any building stuff is to remember who we are and who we belong to. Nehemiah was reestablishing their identity. We need to keep our identity as followers of Christ, as the church of Jesus Christ, above all the things that we do. The other thing we see Nehemiah do is he paves the way for future success. Because the work will never be done, and no one lasts forever to do the work. So after the wall is built, Nehemiah gave leadership roles to godly men who would be faithful to continue the work. Yes, they were family, but understand here, Nehemiah is like, this isn't a nepotism hire. Right? I'm looking for those who are faithful and God-fearing. And he chose people and said, these people are more faithful than God and God-fearing than many. And what we need, church, we need men and women, teenagers and children who are going to continue the work after we're gone. We need faithful, God-fearing people to keep the work going. Nehemiah knew that there was going to be a day where he was going to go back to Persia. He was going to go back and work for the king. He wasn't permanently going to stay in Jerusalem.